Mark Wahlberg arrived at the set of Good Morning America with the casual confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Dressed in a sharp blazer over a fitted black tee, he looked every bit the A-list star promoting his newest action movie. George Stephanopoulos greeted him with a smile, shaking hands as the cameras rolled and the crowd cheered. The interview began smoothly, with Mark sharing behind-the-scenes stories, commenting on the physical demands of the role, and joking about being sore for days after stunts. George nodded politely, but it became clear that his questions were building toward a more serious turn. "Mark, you've also been making headlines lately," George said. "Not just for your work in film, but for some strong opinions you've shared about Hollywood and the media." Wahlberg shifted slightly in his seat, but kept his calm. "Yeah, I've been honest about how I feel. People are tired of being told what to think or how to act by people who live in a bubble." George raised an eyebrow. "Some critics say your comments come off as dismissive toward efforts for inclusion and representation." Mark frowned slightly. "I respect everyone's story, but I don't think forcing social commentary into every project makes for better art." The audience grew noticeably quieter as the tone shifted. George, sensing an opportunity to press further, leaned in and said, "You've talked about so-called woke culture ruining entertainment. What exactly do you mean by that?" Wahlberg gave a half smile. "It means that we've stopped focusing on good storytelling and started focusing on agendas. Not every movie has to carry a message. Sometimes people just want to be entertained." George responded, "But isn't it important to reflect real issues? Isn't art supposed to challenge us?" Mark shot back, "Sure, but when it's authentic, what's happening now is forced. You can tell when a movie is ticking boxes instead of telling a real story." George tilted his head, countering, "But don't those boxes you talk about represent people who were excluded for decades?" Wahlberg's voice was calm but firmer now. "I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I don't need to be lectured on diversity. What I'm saying is that if everything becomes political, we lose the essence of creativity." The tension on the set was undeniable. Some crew members exchanged glances, unsure of where this conversation was heading. George, never one to back away from confrontation, then brought up Mark's recent appearance on a podcast where he criticized celebrities for telling regular
folks how to live.
He quoted Mark directly and asked, "Aren't you a celebrity yourself? Isn't that hypocritical?" Wahlberg laughed sarcastically. "That's the difference. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I don't use my platform to shame people who think differently." That's what I was talking about. George pressed harder. "Isn't speaking out against others still using your platform to push a message?" Mark leaned forward slightly. "It's not the same thing. I'm not saying believe what I believe. I'm saying think for yourself. There's a difference." George's tone tightened. "But that's a convenient way to avoid responsibility. When you say things that stir controversy, it does impact people, it validates certain views that can be harmful." Wahlberg's jaw tensed. "I don't control how people interpret my words. I speak honestly. That's rare in this business." The crowd was clearly caught between admiration and discomfort, not sure whether to applaud or hold their breath. Sensing he had touched a nerve, George shifted gears slightly but stayed on the offensive. "You've had a journey, Mark," he said. "You've transformed your public image from a troubled youth to a respected actor. But some say you haven't fully addressed your past." Mark blinked slowly. "So I've never hidden from my past. I've taken accountability. Worked hard to grow as a person." George nodded, then asked pointedly, "But do you understand why some people still view your success as privilege rewarded, despite mistakes that others wouldn't recover from?" Mark's voice was low but steady. "I know I've had second chances. I also know I earned them by changing, by giving back, by doing the work, not by talking about it nonstop." George interjected, "But visibility matters. Some say your reluctance to acknowledge systemic issues shows a lack of understanding." Mark sighed audibly. "Or maybe I just don't buy into the idea that we all need to keep dragging the past into every conversation. I believe in growth, not guilt." There was a flicker of applause from a few in the crowd, but it was quickly silenced by the growing discomfort in the room. Things took a sharper turn when George brought up Wahlberg's faith. "You've spoken openly about your Catholic beliefs," George said. Do you think your moral framework influences your views on social issues? Mark replied confidently. Of course it does. I believe in forgiveness, in discipline, in personal responsibility. That's what my faith teaches me. George nodded, but then added, some might say that's why your comments on gender, parenting, and politics sound out of touch to younger generations. Wahlberg narrowed his eyes. Just because I believe in certain values doesn't mean I hate people who don't. That's a false narrative people love to push. George continued, but don't you think it's important to evolve with the times? Mark's voice sharpened. Evolving doesn't mean abandoning your values. It means being respectful. I can disagree without being hateful. George replied, yet you've been accused of promoting division under the guise of honesty. Wahlberg chuckled bitterly. And you've just proven my point. Being honest now means being labeled a villain. The room was dead silent. Even the cameraman had stopped moving, frozen by the rising heat of the exchange. It was clear the atmosphere had shifted beyond recovery. George looked down at his notes, then looked back up and said, you've said Hollywood doesn't represent real America. What do you mean by that? Wahlberg responded, I mean that regular people don't live in gated communities or fly private jets to climate conferences. They work, they hustle. They don't want lectures from the red carpet. George challenged him, but isn't that exactly your lifestyle now? Aren't you also part of the elite you criticize? Mark snapped. That's why I don't lecture people. I live my life. I give back. But I don't pretend to be their moral compass. George responded, but by saying what you've said, haven't you made yourself a symbol for certain movements, even if you don't want to be? Wahlberg's voice was rising now. I'm a symbol for speaking your mind without fear. That's it. I didn't come here to be dissected like a case study. The producers began talking frantically through earpieces. The show's director signaled for a break. But the conversation had already reached boiling point. George leaned forward with a composed intensity. Mark, this is a platform where voices matter. Don't you think it's fair to challenge you when your views have real influence? Wahlberg stood his ground. Challenge away, but don't twist my words. I came here to talk about a movie, not get interrogated like I'm on trial. George replied, but don't you think celebrities should be held accountable for the impact they have? Wahlberg countered, sure, but accountability isn't the same as shaming. I've taken ownership of my past and my views. I don't owe anyone an apology for speaking the truth. George looked him in the eye. Even if your truth offends people, Mark replied, offense is subjective. If people are looking to be offended, they'll find a reason. That line caused a stir in the audience. A few claps rang out, while others murmured uneasily. The conversation had turned personal, philosophical, and emotional all at once. Wahlberg's posture was rigid, his patience clearly tested. George looked toward the control booth, clearly getting instructions, but continued as if nothing had changed. Then came the final question, the one that broke the interview. George said, do you think you're misunderstood? Or do you just enjoy being controversial? Wahlberg gave a short laugh and shook his head. I think the media wants me to be controversial. That's how you sell clips and headlines. But I know who I am. I sleep well at night. George smiled thinly. So it's everyone else's problem? Wahlberg's eyes narrowed. You know what, man? I've had enough of this. Not looking for a conversation? You're looking for a headline? The audience gasped. George tried to de-escalate. We're just having a dialogue, Mark. That's what this show is for. But Wahlberg was already pulling off his mic. You brought me here under false pretenses. I'm not doing this. He stood up, looked toward the producers and said, thanks, but I'm done. The set was frozen in shock as he walked off stage. The camera tried to follow him before cutting back to George, who was clearly flustered but composed. After the episode aired, social media exploded with clips from the interview. Some viewers praised Wahlberg for standing his ground, saying he had every right to defend himself against what they saw as an ambush. Others criticized him for walking off, saying he couldn't handle tough questions and that his views were outdated. Pundits and influencers weighed in from all sides, with hashtags trending by the hour. Wahlberg Waka and GM Clash became top topics on X. The incident reignited debates around celebrity responsibility, media bias, and the boundaries of free speech in mainstream platforms. Good Morning America released a brief statement saying they valued open, honest dialogue and wished Mark the best. Wahlberg posted a short message later that day. "I stand by what I said. You don't have to agree with me, but I won't be silenced for